As always, I will admit as I go along. We'll just give everybody a few moments. Turn off my notifications.
Oh God, yes. Sorry, I'll try and do that. That's so annoying.
Yeah, I made the terrible mistake of putting WhatsApp on my computer as well.
Oh no, I'm just turning it off mine. It makes the bloody noise the whole time. It's really
on my laptop. It's very confusing and irritating at the same time. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome once again to Soho Whisky Club at home. Could I please ask you all very briefly for a moment to unmute your... We shall do the traditional cheer. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening,
George.
Fantastic, thank you very much. It does still work in a sense. God, I can't wait until the first one of those live. Could everybody please now remute yourselves? Thank you very much. And a very, very warm welcome. We have a fantastic and unique whiskey tasting, as they always are when Colin Dunn is in town. Today we are doing some lovely Diageo whiskies. I hope you've got them in front of you with your tasting mat. And we are celebrating World Book Day. Book Day is tomorrow, so please dust off those old libraries of yours. Read at least half an hour tomorrow. It's really good for us. It's good for the mind. It's good for the soul. And to start us off, to get you in the mood, we are going to do 5 short readings mixed alongside 5 short drams. We have the brilliant Colin Dunn here from Diageo. I am extremely privileged. I've been at the Soho Whisky Club for 3 years now. I've got 3 friends on the call who are going to do readings. One of them, my mentor. One of my mentors, Colin Dunn from Diageo. What an incredible man. I'm so very grateful for the time that he's given me. I then have another very, very good friend, Colin Vaines. God, I see Colin most days, which is great fun. Out on the terrace, we have some good fun. And I will introduce Colin for our second reading a little bit later. We also have another friend of mine who I met 2 years ago, Russ Kane. Russ is hopefully joining us in a little bit. He's on another call at the moment. If not, I shall do a reading from his book, because Russ, as well as being Capital's eye in the sky for 20 years, is now an author. So he's brought out a brilliant book. I've got it here. You can buy it on Amazon and at good booksellers, good bookshops. The Gatekeeper, read it. It's brilliant. But yeah, that's it. That's what we're going to do. I'm also doing a little reading. I apologize in advance. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to hand you over to the brilliant Mr. Colin Dunn.
Hello, everyone. Well, thanks for joining. A privilege, pleasure as always, to be at the Soho Whisky Club virtually. I read a couple of weeks ago that it was International Book Day or World Book Day. And I suddenly realized that during lockdown, over the last few months, I've been reading a lot more of the books that have been permeating my shelves for years and years. And I remembered that I did a tasting at the Soho Whisky Club a year or 2 ago about the bohemians, the brawlers, the prostitutes, the gamblers, the artists who frequented Soho back in the 50s, 60s and 70s. People like Francis Bacon, the list is endless. And I thought it would be a good idea, walking through Kew Gardens about 2 weeks ago with George. I said, look, why don't we invite a couple of your esteemed friends from the club to talk about and read a small snippet of their favorite stories. So with that, we put together a list of 5 whiskies, and I'm going to go straight into it. The first whiskey that I'd like you to peruse over, along with the reading that I'm about to do. And hopefully they'll get you in the mood on this, is it Wednesday? Yes, on this Wednesday evening. It's cold, it's wet, it's not been a very nice day. So I hope some of the words that have been put together by some great authors over a period of time will come to life. So I've just poured myself a small glass of Dalwhinnie, and without laboring the point, Dalwhinnie is one of those whiskies that tends to be forgotten about in the Diageo portfolio. It comes in kind of like a retro bottle and even retro label. The whiskey's made right in the Central Highlands, very, very cold, around about 300 feet above sea level. So the whiskey takes quite a long time to mature. And this one, in fact, which is what I call the standard release, if that's not putting it down, is 15 years old. And we age it in bourbon barrels. And in the Diageo portfolio, which is 28 distilleries, Dalwhinnie is the most bourbon-esque style, along with Cardew. It's full of rich, sweet fruit flavors. I tend to drink it with a cube of ice. My daughter, who I turned on to whiskey through Dalwhinnie, she had it with Ben & Jerry's dark chocolate ice cream, and then proceeded to go on to drinking it with ice, then in a highball with soda water, till eventually, now she drinks it neat. She's now my biggest Dalwhinnie client. She's a Dalwhinnie alcoholic now. So Dalwhinnie is something that I think will act as a moose bouche, a starter for the evening that we've got planned for you. So without further ado, the first, excuse me, reading that I'd like to do for you actually comes from a book that I seen on the shelves in the Soho Whiskey Club. And it's probably my #1 book on whiskey. And the book is called Appreciating Whiskey by a guy called Philip Hills. Now, very briefly, Philip Hills' claim to fame is that while living up in Scotland, him and his mates enjoyed whiskey. Somebody came up with the idea of saying, why don't we buy a barrel and share it amongst ourselves? They went to Glenfarclas, they bought a barrel, they drank it all. They then went to another distillery and then another one. And in the end, Philip Hills started a club, and he called the club the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. So the SMWS, which you have now based in Edinburgh and in London, and with ports of call now all around the world, all emanated from this particular guy, Philip Hills. And his book, I think, is absolutely fantastic. So without further ado, while you're sipping on your lightly chilled Dalwhinnie, I'm going to read a little piece found on page 6 of the book, which has been written by one of my favorite authors. And that particular gentleman is called John Steinbeck. Now, John Steinbeck used to play on the wing for Chelsea in the diamond formation. No, seriously. So John Steinbeck, I'm sure you don't need a Wikipedia on him, but suffice to say that The Grapes of Wrath and Of Mice and Men are two of my favorite books. Of Mice and Men because it's so short, and Grapes of Wrath because it gave me a real understanding of the Dust Bowl years in Central America and the poverty and the route those people had to go on to hopefully achieve financial stability. But also he was a bit of a drinker. And the piece that I've got, actually, Philip Hills quoted in the book. So are you all ready for a little bit of John Steinbeck? Give me a yeah. I'll take that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Aye.
Okay.
Yeah.
John Steinbeck from Cannery Row. Mac and the boys are bums who live in a converted barn on a vacant lot next to the canneries in Monterey. One of their number, Angel, has a part-time job as a barman in La Ida's, a well-managed whorehouse and social service facility. Mac and the boys are perennially dry since they lack the wherewithal to purchase liquor. Angel keeps a jug beneath the bar at La Ida's, which is known as the whining jug, into which is pitched anything anyone leaves in a glass. The resulting potation, while not refined, is at least varied, depending as it does on who leaves what in his or her glass. Every evening after Angel has returned from work, Mac and the boys sample the contents even, of the whining jug. This they do with great seriousness and gratitude. They sample, they savor, and they discuss. They remark on any unusual elements. They know how much wine has been ordered and how much beer. They catch the whiff of anything unusual in the mix. And as the jug goes down, they reminisce about previous whining jugs, about refined or exotic mixtures. They appreciate. If this seems too fictional an account, I can tell you about my friend Jimmy the fish. I run into him a lot at whiskey tastings. Few people who go to a whiskey tasting drink all the whiskey. And there is usually a lot left over in the glasses. When we clear up afterwards, we generally tip the remains into a plastic water bottle and give Tim the mixture, a litre at a time, to Jimmy. We have to ration it, otherwise Jimmy would kill himself, for he is fond of the stuff. It is, however, evident that his appreciation goes well beyond the mere alcoholic content, for he will often comment on the liquor, appraising its character, at least as accurately as do the people who have inspected it in fancy nosing glasses. Having said all that, appreciating whiskey is not just about the taste. There are other forms of appreciation. I don't propose to deal with them at length, but some I think worth more than a mention. As far as I am concerned, whiskey is for drinking. This is our sole raison d'etre. You can do a lot of things with it other than drinking it, but none of those things take any cognizance of its reality as whiskey. You could equally well do them with other things. Some people do. Collect almost anything. Collecting is a sort of idiocy. The collector seeking simply to aggregate a holding of whatever takes his or her fancy. Rembrandts, beer mats, furry toys, corkscrews, postage stamps, esoteric diseases, even Bimber Soho Whiskey Society bottlings. All that matters is getting more of the same. This is of little consequence, save in two ways. First, by removing circulation articles of a certain sort, it diminishes the diversity of our environment. The price of such whiskies relates only to their value to the collectors, and not at all to people who want to put the stuff into the glass by nosing, tasting, and drinking it. That, my friends, is my first gift to you of Philip Hills and John Steinbeck, who both had a love for this nectar, this aquavita, this eau de vie, this ushkabar that we have in our glass for you this evening. So thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely brilliant. And what a dram to go with it as well.
Gorgeous.
Absolutely incredible. Thank you.
So what I'd like to do now is, if you've supped your Dalwhinnie and you are now firmly ensconced in your chair and in a relaxed mood, I'd like to introduce you to the second whiskey, which is Glenkinchie Amontillado Finish. Now, I'm a huge fan of Amontillado sherry. I think it's one of the most underrated fortified wines that's on the market today. Sherry is almost overlooked in this country, but the range is fantastic. Amontillado tends to be dry, fruity, with a mixture of stone fruits, dark cherries, figs. I love to drink this on my own pre-dinner or pre-fish fingers on a Monday evening. I love the smell of Amontillado in the evening. So, so Glenkinchie, for me, if it was a motorbike, it would be a Barley Davidson.
Oh,
So without further ado, I'm now going to hand you over to my fellow aptly named individual, to Colin Baines. I'm going to switch Miles Davis off and I'm going to listen to the soft, dulcet tones of Colin. Over to you.
hello, everybody. I know many people have had the unfortunate thing of knowing who I am. There are other people there that don't know who I am. But anyway, I'm a long-time member of the Whisky Club, one of my favourite places on the planet. And I've worked in...
For those of you who don't know who you are, Colin, would you like to introduce yourself, or shall I?
Go on, you do it, George. Then I can wallow in the kind of the embarrassment of it.
Okay, well, this is a man who I met 3 years ago. My God, I used to be a terrible actor. It would have been great to have known Mr. Colin Baines back then. I really missed out. But Colin is a man with more stories than I have had breaths. He's always great fun and always to be found during the early afternoon on the Soho Whisky Club terrace. He has so many stories because he has such an incredible and wonderful career. Very briefly, you might well know him as the producer on films such as Film Stars Don't Die in Liverpool, Gangs of New York, and indeed the Rum Diary, which I believe, Colin, you're going to do a short piece from now, having adapted it. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Colin Baines.
Thank you. Thank you. So when Colin and George asked me to participate tonight, I naturally thought, what can I contribute that combines literature and booze, and what has some kind of personal touch about it? So inevitably, I turned to the movie I made, which involved a considerable number of, I would say politely, literary boozers. There would be another word for them as well, which is the Rum Diary. Now, the Rum Diary, for those who are unfamiliar, I think Colin has a copy of the book, in fact, which he can... Look at that. See, he provides the props when I forget them. The Rum Diary is written by Hunter S. Thompson, who I'm sure you all know, famous gonzo journalist, most famous for Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. When he started out as a writer, he was basically trying to find his voice as a writer. And he actually wrote a book in 1961 called The Rum Diary, which remained undiscovered until the time that he got to know a gentleman called Johnny Depp. And obviously they worked together on Fear and Loathing. They were very simpatico, i.e. they were both extremely excessive in everything that they drank, snorted and whatever. And one day in the 90s, Johnny Depp was staying at Hunter Thompson's house, and in a brief respite from their various endeavors, Johnny noticed under the bed a box with a manuscript in it. And that was the manuscript of the Rum Diary, which had lain there for like 20, 30 years. So Johnny arranged for the book to be published. And there then followed the usual kind of horrors of trying to adapt a book into a film. And there were 2 attempts earlier on that hadn't succeeded. When I came into the picture, I was working for a producer called Graham King in Los Angeles. Graham was one of the people I'd known from things like Gangs of New York, which he'd been involved in selling, but he's gone on subsequently to such massive hits as Bohemian Rhapsody and so on. Anyway, I joined, and with my usual immaculate timing, I hit the moment when the writers' strike happened in 2007, and nobody could do anything much because nobody was allowed to write scripts. So I undertook a massive reading operation in the office to really see anything that they'd bought and owned or whatever that might have some life to it. And I came across a script for the Rum Diary written by a guy that I'd known for years, hadn't actually worked with, but had been a friend or whatever. And of course, everyone in the world knows as the writer-director of Withnail and I, Bruce Robinson. And what had happened was that both Johnny Depp and Hunter Thompson were big fans of Bruce's, and so they'd approached him to come up with a screenplay. And it had been literally sitting kind of in a slush pile almost. It was one of those projects that just wasn't moving forward. I mean, it was an oddity because it is, as any of you who've seen the film will know, it's kind of a Shaggy Dog story. I mean, it's there is not a lot happens in it, but it's more the mood and the feeling and the strangeness of it, which is quite Withnail-like in the way that it's done. So I read it and thought, well, we could do something with this. I mean, I think it was both a really great idea and a really bad idea, if I'm really honest, because it was great because we had something that we could work with and film. It was not such a great idea because I think we should have done more work on it and it needed more work. But it's a film that you know, over time, I think people have really like. It has its fans, it has its detractors or whatever, but I think it's a film unto itself, and it's a lovely picture of, I mean, I think Johnny Depp put it rather well. He said, "The Rum Diary is a tale of misspent youth searching for a voice amid the sun and free-flowing rum of late 50s Puerto Rico that everyone should taste." And that's what I think the film does capture. We shot it in Puerto Rico. We actually shot it on 16mm film because we wanted it to have a look that would look slightly different. We didn't want it to look digital, and we didn't want it to look glossy like a 35mm film. So we shot it in 16mm and then tweaked the color in it so it looks like sort of 50s Kodachrome or something like that. So it has a beautiful look. And I really loved what Bruce did with it, because Bruce has a very particular style. As a screenwriter, he writes in a way that draws you into what you're reading on the page. He also has a fabulous ear for dialogue. And when I thought about doing something from the book tonight, I thought at first maybe I should just read a passage from the book. But actually, I think it was more interesting, I hope, to kind of actually concentrate on the combination of elements in this and in Bruce's writing. So what I've done is I've taken a section quite early in the film when Kemp, which is the Hunter Thompson surrogate character, arrives in Puerto Rico, and he goes to a newspaper office for an interview. And I've combined several of the characters, because of my limited acting skills, combined them into Lotterman, the editor, and done it as a kind of a monologue. So this is essentially what happens. It's important. At the end of the scene before, Kemp is ushered into Lotterman's office and advised, "Don't notice the wig." This is how the scene starts. The first thing you notice about Lotterman is the wig. It's like a limp hat with an unfortunate colour scheme. Lifting a glance towards Kemp, he gets back to some heavyweight reading. A red pencil is frequently used. Without interest in anything else, he finds a voice. "If you're who I think you are, you better sit down." The instruction is followed and Kemp looks about. Lotterman is something out the old school, mid-60s, striped shirts and suspenders. One or two things about his office are worth pointing out. There's a big map of Puerto Rico on a wall and crossed flags of the same country in the USA on his desk. Behind him are windows looking onto the street. More editing with the red pencil. and eyes twist back with a reference to Kemp's sunglasses. You find it a little bright in here? Oh, you have a medical condition. What do you mean, you're blind? Oh, conjunctivitis, the old red eye. A slow fan swivels on his desk. He tosses the edit aside. You arrive at a very trying time, Mr. Kemp. One of those days stacking up. So if you don't mind, we'll skip the niceties and get right to it. Lotterman finds a file. I was impressed by your CV. You've worked your way up some interesting titles. I like the fluent Spanish. The only thing that bothers me about it is the bits that are missing. You know, like what happened between St. Louis and New York, and now why Puerto Rico? I mean, frankly, Mr. Kemp, I don't think you're down here to spite the Washington Post. This CV is a bunch of bullshit. You're either overqualified or you're lying. The door flies open and in comes a man who doesn't need to knock. He's Spanish-American and that'll do for now. He proffers a telex. This is 2 days old. We don't have the story. His shallow sigh is a study in minimalistic fury. What's the matter with my staff? They're about as much use as a dug-up body. A resigned and bitter smile takes over. There may be an issue of blood pressure. The problem with this newspaper, Mr. Kemp, is that I am among many who don't enjoy reading it. We have an ailing circulation, and I only have to look around this building to understand why. Lack of commitment, too much self-indulgence. I got people on salary here who come in like guests. On days like this, I feel like I'm running the thing on my own. So I'm looking for some enthusiasm, some energy, some fresh blood. And the question I'm asking myself is, how much alcohol is usually in yours? Yeah, that's right. How much do you drink? Oh, the upper end is social, and you're poised to give up, right? Puerto Rico might not be the best place on earth to do that. Don't look so anxious, Kemp. I wouldn't be paying for a hotel if I hadn't already hired you. But this isn't the last chance saloon, and I got no place for another heavy drinker, which I perceive from the conditions of eyeballs behind sunglasses, you might very well qualify as. Lotterman finds Kemp's hotel bill and waves it at him. How does anyone drink 161 miniatures? You're averaging 23 miniatures a day. And no, Mr. Kemp, they're not complimentary, and neither is wine or long-distance phone calls. As of Monday, you are no longer a resident at the Xanadu. Lotterman opens the door as he escorts Kemp back into the newsroom. Hey, Bob, you're the man I want to see. This is Paul Kemp. He's joining us from New York. Do me a favor, will you show him around a little, the do's and don'ts? This is a schizoid society. They got 2 languages, 2 flags, 2 anthems, and 2 loyalties. We bring them stuff they never had, and they either hate it or want more of it. It's a kind of reluctant part of America, like in England with tropical fruit. So Bob, introduce him to some of the guys. No, do not take him to Al's. Take him to the library, pull out some volumes. I want him to get a sense of the paper. Go back a few years, take some notes, paying particular attention to the bowling alleys. Bowling and bowling alleys is big. They spring up like mushrooms. A new one premieres every week. You're going to fall right into Puerto Rico, Kemp. There's a boom on. It's an open door. Play it right, you can surf the place. They arrive at a desk with star charts and astrological books. It's clear somebody was working this junk until recently. Hey, what do you know about horoscopes? I mean, if I can write one, you can. It's every day with a special Stars featured Saturdays. Betty Grable, Neil Sedaka, that kind of thing. You'll find everything you need right here. It's called Madame Lazonga Predicts. What? What happened to Madame Lazonga? Yeah, he got cancelled. No, not fired. They raped him to death. There are very few places on this island I decline to visit, but the toilets frequented by sailors on the west side of Candado Pier is one. Lazonga died in a cubicle. Lotterman pauses and eyes Kemp and his menthol fag suspiciously. Hey, you're not artistic, are you, Kemp? Oh, good, good. You might want to reconsider those refrigerated cigarettes. They don't do a thing for you.
Fantastic. Wow.
Cheers.
Very much. Cheers, Colin. Wow.
Colin,
Oh,
can you read the next chapter and just stay on and do the whole bit? I've got the whiskey here. I've got 5 bottles here. I definitely think part 2 is due at some point. Wicked, wicked. I have to say, if I may, Bruce Robinson. I'm a huge film buff, And I remember when I went to the cinema in London to see Withnail and I, which was, from my memory, was depicting life in London for two out of work actors, if you will, in the late 60s in London. And I found it quite mesmerizing. It was a slow burner, and it's become almost like a cult movie now. And as it turned out, at the time, I was living in Richmond with my wife and daughter. And every morning I would take my daughter to school and see Richard E. Grant taking his children to school. So one day, very quickly here, there was a charity sale on at the school, and we all were requested to donate something. So Richard E. Grant donated the full-length leather coat that he wore in Withnail and I. I'm not sure if anyone has seen the movie, but it is, in my book, probably in my top 10.
Top 10 drinking.
And Richard E. Grant, he's about 6'3", and I'm 5'8", and I'm at the boot sale with my wife, and there is Richard E. Grant's full-length leather jacket, and it's there for £15. So I said, I want that jacket to my wife. I want that jacket. I want that coat. She goes, no, it wouldn't look good on you. It's too long. I said, well, let me try it on. Let me try it on. So I put on Richard E. Grant's leather coat, and it was about this much past my foot, right? It was to the ground and some. So my wife said to me, there's no way you're going to buy that coat because you'll never wear it. And so I passed up the opportunity to have a piece of film memorabilia that I would have cherished to this day. But hey ho, I've got the memory, and it's a bit like some of the whiskies that we have in front of us and some of the books, you know, the Rum Diary, I've not read for maybe 4 years now. And as Colin so rightfully said, Johnny Depp, he got into the part and he almost became Hunter S. Thompson and became his persona in real life. So I'm really pleased that I was able to listen to that piece while sipping on a glass of fortified wine, courtesy of a Spanish vigneron. So that was great, Colin. That was great, man. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. So I hope all of you at home, you're getting the gist of where we are. We're just taking things nice and slow. We're just relaxed. We're getting into what I call book mode. And with that, I'm going to introduce, as they say in the post office, whiskey number 3, please. And the whiskey that I've chosen is a perennial favorite with me, called Mortlak. Now, very briefly, Mortlak has had a rebirth. For years and years, well, for literally 200 years, Mortlak goes into blended whiskey, not just from Diageo, but from a lot of other companies like Chivas, etc. We sell Mortlak to other blenders and we use it in, excuse me, Cutty Sark, Bell's, Johnny Walker Black, etc. So it doesn't really have a chance to shine because, as I'm sure you're aware, Diageo, from a whiskey perspective, is a blending company that also produces single malts. But the bulk of its business is blended whiskey. So Mortlak took a back seat. The so-called whiskey aficionados believe that Mortlak at 16 years of age is a big, rich, succulent, meaty expression that comes alive on the back palate, on the finish. This finishes better than Ronaldo and has a bigger bite than Luis Suarez, right? Now, A few years ago, it was available in a range that we have called the Flora and Fauna range, and it was never on sale outside of independent specialists like that grubby little place down on Old Compton Street, run by that manic guy, I think he's called Malcolm, and he would have Mortlak 16 for about 35, 40 pounds, but very few people bought it. So at Diageo, the bean counters said, look, we don't sell enough of it. We're going to have to take it off sale and reintroduce it in another way, a rebirth. It was brought back about 5 years ago, primarily for the Asian market. So it came in a beautiful crafted bottle, but the price did kind of go up. And thankfully, Diageo realized that it wasn't the right thing to do. So they took it off sale and they reintroduced Mortlak 12, 16, and the 20-year-old, which I'm very, very happy with. And to finish, before I hand over to George, can I say that about 2 years ago at an auction in Germany, I managed to pick up a bottle of Mortlak that had been bottled for Macy's in New York. And I picked it up for a very, very small price, about £190. With my friends in New York, they got in contact with Macy's, and Macy's said, would you like to open that bottle, almost like a prodigal son, return the bottle to Macy's, and we'll open it in New York. It'll be a charity event for Water of Life, and people paid upwards of $500 each to taste the old 1950s style Mortlak that was bottled for Macy's in New York. I flew over there, stayed on Fifth Avenue, had a great time with whiskey drinking people. And then it came to the big moment in Macy's where I took along a modern day 16-year-old Mortlak like you have now. And we tasted it before the 1950s. And everybody who was there, and these were serious whiskey people, agreed that the taste had not really changed apart from something called bottle age, where it had become a little bit more rancio, a little bit more musty, which hitherto you would find in wines, but now there's a lot of people who believe that it happens also in whiskey. So I'm very, very happy that Mortlak has come back onto the market. You've got the 16-year-old. Before I hand you over to George, I just ask you, give this whiskey round about 10 seconds in the mouth, and it will give you 3 to 4 minutes of bliss with the aftertaste. So without further ado, just when you thought you'd seen it all, then came George. Over to you.
Okay, wow. How to follow? This is it's going to be interesting. So when Colin and I went along the road of this tasting, I was like, oh, what am I going to do? So I have a bookcase here, and most of it you can't do for various reasons. And then I found some old books that look like that, and the spines are very well aged in sunlight. And I started reading and looking through them. And this is my great aunt's book. I only just remember her, to be honest. Nora Lewis, 1935, it says in the front cover. It is A.A. Milne. It's Winnie the Pooh. And I thought it would be a little bit fun the day before World Book Day to read some of the first chapter for you. Oh, it's by A.A. Milne, obviously. I think you know that. Winnie the Pooh. Chapter 1, in which we are introduced to Winnie the Pooh and some bees, and the stories begin. Here is Edward Bear coming down the stairs now. Bump, bump, bump on the back of his head behind Christopher Robin. It is, as far as he knows, the only way of coming down the stairs, but sometimes he feels like there really is another way. If only he could stop bumping for a moment and think of it. And then he feels that perhaps there isn't. Anyhow, here he is at the bottom of the stairs and ready to be introduced to you. Winnie the Pooh. When I first heard his name, I said, just as you're going to say, but I thought he was a boy. So did I, said Christopher Robin. Then why don't you call him Winnie? I don't. But you said he's Winnie the Pooh. Don't you know what the means? I do now, I said quickly. And I hope you do too, because that's all the explanation that you're going to get. Sometimes Winnie the Pooh likes a game of some sort when he comes downstairs, and sometimes he likes to sit quietly in front of the fire and listen to a story. This evening, what about a story? Said Christopher Robin. What about a story? I said. Could you very sweetly tell Winnie the Pooh one? I suppose I could, I said. What sort of story does he like? About himself, because he's that sort of bear. I see. So could you, very sweetly? I'll try, I said. So I tried. Once upon a time, a very long time ago now, about last Friday, Winnie the Pooh lived in a forest all by himself under the name of Sanders. What does under the name mean? Asked Christopher Robin. It means he had his name over the door in gold letters and he lived under it. Winnie the Pooh wasn't quite sure, said Christopher Robin. Now I am, said Winnie the Pooh. Then I'll go on, I said. One day, when he was out walking, he came to an open place in the middle of the forest, and in the middle of this place was a large oak tree, and from the top of the tree there came a loud buzzing noise. Winnie the Pooh sat down at the foot of the tree, put his head between his paws, and began to think. First of all, he said to himself, that buzzing noise. You don't get a buzzing noise like that, just buzzing and buzzing without it meaning something. If there's a buzzing noise, somebody's making a buzzing noise, and the only reason I know of for making a buzzing noise is because you're a bee. Then he thought another long time and he said, and the only reason for being a bee that I know of is making honey. And then he got up and said, and the only reason for making honey is so I can eat it. So he began to climb the tree. He climbed and he climbed and he climbed and he climbed and he sang a little song to himself as he climbed. And it went a bit like this. Isn't it funny how a bear makes honey? Buzz, buzz, buzz. I wonder why he does. Then he climbed a little bit further. And a little further, and then just a little further. By that time, he thought of another song. Isn't it funny, a funny thought that if bees were bears, bears were bees, they'd build their nests at the bottom of trees. And that being so, if bees were bears, we shouldn't have to climb up all these stairs. He was getting rather tired by this time, so that's why he sang a complaining song. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing it. He was nearly there now, and if he just stood on that branch, crack Ah, help, said Pooh as he dropped 10 feet onto the branch below. If only I hadn't, he said as he bounced 20 feet onto the next branch. You see, what I meant to do, he explained as he turned head over heels and crashed onto another branch 30 feet below. What I meant to do, of course, it was rather, he admitted as he slithered very quickly through the next 6 branches. It all comes, I suppose, he decided as he said goodbye to the last branch, spun round 3 times and flew gracefully into a gorse bush. It all comes of liking so much honey. Ah, help! He crawled out of the gorse bush, brushed the prickles from his nose, and began to think again. And the first person he thought of was Christopher Robin. Was that me? Said Christopher Robin in an awed voice, hardly daring to believe it. That was you. Christopher Robin said nothing, but his eyes got larger and larger, and his face got pinker and pinker. So, Winnie the Pooh went round to his friend, Christopher Robin, who lived behind a green door in another part of the forest. Good morning, Christopher Robin, he said. Good morning, Winnie the Pooh. I wonder if you got such a thing as a balloon about you. A balloon? Said Christopher Robin. Yeah. I just said to myself, coming along, I wonder if Christopher Robin has such a thing as a balloon about him. I just said it to myself, thinking of balloons and wondering, what would you want a balloon for? You said. Winnie the Pooh looked round to see that nobody was listening. He put a paw to his mouth and he said in a deep whisper, honey. Winnie the Pooh.
Very good interpretation. Beautiful.
Yeah, man. I was singing along to that. Buzz, buzz, buzz. I wonder what he does.
Oh, God, I should have
Yeah,
got you to do the music.
Fucking great. Lovely. Thank you.
Well done. I'd just say to all of you out there, if you have any comments or you'd like to make a few entries into this wonderful evening, feel free. Feel free. I mean, really, what this is Colin, George, and Russ and myself indulging ourselves in some of our favorite pieces. You know, I did a tasting the other week for some millennials. And I said to them, you know, I'm going to read from some books. Do you remember books? They used to be quite popular back in the 20th century because there are so many books sitting, and I can't speak for all of you out there, but I know in my case, I've got in the region of about 200 or 300 books here. And I'm now slowly, methodically going through them again. And the ones that I don't maybe rate as much in my mind as I used to, I'm giving them away. I'm giving them away to people. For example, whiskey books. I've got about 100 whiskey books. If anybody wants some whiskey books, just let me know. I've read them, I've reread them. I've decided I only really need maybe a dozen going forward in my remaining 65 years. That all the others, I'm happy to hand on, no charge. If you would like to get me a Bimber Soa Whiskey Club bottle or a Carazoa, I won't say no. But in all honesty, I've learnt as I move into my better years, giving is as good, if not better, than receiving. So I really appreciate George picking out something that lives in the minds and hearts of a lot of people from, 8 to 88. It's a classic story that's lasted the test of time, which leads me on to something else that's lasted the test of time, and that is a whiskey from our stable called Talisker. And Talisker has really come into prominence over the last sort of 20 years. Distillery's been there since 1830, but never really got promoted until 1989, when they released the classic 10-year-old. I think you've all got the 10-year-old. Is that right, George? Is it the 10?
No, we've got the Distillers Edition.
We've got a different one. You've got the Distillers Edition. So the Distillers Edition, if you think of what Talisker has built its reputation on, it's because it's got that red hot chili pepper kick. And I never say it's peaty. I always say it's peppery. And because of that lifting pepperiness, it goes really well with a variety of foods. We promote it quite heavily with oysters, but also as a highball. In Japan, on the main island of Honshu, the #1 whiskey drink for the under 25s is called Mizawari, which is basically whiskey and water with ice cubes. And the #1 choice with the youngsters in Japan is Talisker 10. And if you think 20 years ago, the flavor of Talisker was not really considered that cool. Most people like their whiskies kind of, I won't say flat, but no rough edges, nicely rounded, as they say in the marketing world, perfectly balanced. And then all of a sudden, the smoky flavors like Ardbeg and Lefroy, Bamor, etc., they started to come alive. And Talisker almost reinvented itself and has become incredibly popular. So in 89, there was one Talisker, the 10-year-old. Here we are in 2021, and there are 13 different Taliskers available for the public, ranging from £35 with Sky and Storm, all the way up to the vintage ones, the 41-year-olds, etc., 42-year-olds, that cost an awful lot more. I think, digressing for a second, it is sad that whiskey, particularly aged whiskey, has now become very, very expensive. So I urge people to join a whiskey club where you're able to share it at a sensible price. This is the way forward. During lockdown, briefly here, I'm hosting more and more online tastings in towns and villages and cities that have started up their own whiskey clubs. It's quite incredible. I've probably done about 30 to 40 tastings in the last 6 weeks with groups, not just out around the country, but also in Germany. Next week, I'm hosting one in Germany, one in New York, which is coming up. So the world is really bought into the idea that it's about flavor, it's about taste, but it's also about expressing one's views. And some of the tastings that I've been done, I've encouraged people to write their tasting notes in the chat column for me to look at afterwards. And I'm telling you, some of the tasting notes that people have written are better than the ones that the marketeers do, better than the ones that we do. And I'm all for people using words to describe whiskey, to bring it to life in another way. I think it's one of the best things that's happened in the last 10 or 15 years, where a tasting note can be very personal, but not pretentious. And if it's spoken from the heart with a view to writing down what's on your mind, I'm a very, very happy person. So enough of me. You've got the Distillers Edition, which has been maturing in in refill or first fill bourbon barrels, which effectively means we've brought the barrels over from Kentucky. We've filled it straight away with Talisker whiskey to mature. We've then blended those casks with refill casks that have come over matured Talisker, and we've used them again. So there's less of the original spirit, bourbon, to influence the whiskey. If you take a first fill bourbon barrel, you will get vanilla and coconut and that soft, creamy note that you find in Diageo's case, in Dalwhinnie and in Cardew. But when you move on to refill, it's less about the wood and it's more about the distillate. It's more about the barley and what we've done with it, and more about the way that it's been actually created in the washbacks and the still house. And here we've taken Talisker after 10, 12 years, and we've transferred the whiskey into what's called Amoroso sherry casks. So I'm not sure if any of you are sherry drinkers out there, but effectively Amoroso is a blend of sherries from Oloroso and Pedro Jimenez, otherwise known as PX. And if you've tasted raw, uncut Pedro Jimenez, you'll know that it's thick, luscious, liqueurish. Some people love it over vanilla ice cream. Now you imagine that flavor in a barrel, that PX richness, along with the fruity undertones from Oloroso casks, it's gonna influence the whiskey. And what you'll find here is that this is Talisker in a leather coat. It's heavier, it's richer in the mouth, but you still get that classic chili pepper kick in the finish. For those of you who like cigars, often at whiskey and cigar tastings that I do, the Talisker Distillers Edition, is a choice that seemingly goes down pretty well with a medium to long draw cigar. So enough of me. I hope you pick it up and give it a little bit of time. This is probably after the Mortlach. This has still got that liqueur richness, but the finish is unmistakably sky. So as Jimi Hendrix once said, excuse me while I kiss the sky. And now I'm going to hand over to George. Thank you, George. Hand over to George, or possibly Russ. I'm not really sure, but over to you, George.
Russ is on. Russ is on. You are here, aren't you, Russ? Russ?
There we are.
There we are. How are you, mate? You okay?
Germany calling. Yes, I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fine. Fine. So, gosh, this is wonderful whiskies. What a terrific evening.
They're brilliant. Now, I'm not going to lie. Just to warn you, you are going on to peated ones, and I know you're not a massive fan of peated whiskies. So,
night, everybody.
Good night.
Bye. See you.
No, top yourself up with the previous ones.
It will. The first one was magnificent.
There are many people who I try and edge into peated whiskies. Russ, I just know, don't bother. Just he knows what he likes. Russ, thank you so very much for joining us. For those of you who don't know who this exquisite and lovely gentleman in front of you is, this is Mr. Russ Kane. Russ, am I allowed to tell them a little bit about you?
Okay. If it was good enough for Colin, I'll accept it.
So Russ, is that Ebony?
Well, kind of.
Russ,
complicated.
You might well recognize Russ's voice, actually. Russ was the eye in the sky on Chris Tarrant's Capital show. for 20 years, weren't you, Russ? About 20 years?
Mm.
Up in the plane. I read an article once thinking that you were in a helicopter, but you were always in a plane.
Yep.
And now Russ looks after and is the founder, indeed, of one of the founders of Men's Radio Station. I had the privilege of going on to Men's Radio Station in late 2018, I think it was. Is that right? Yeah, it must have been.
Yep.
And Men's Radio Station is a fantastic radio station that I implore you all to go on and listen to. And it's all about mental health and men talking about the issues that they might often think that they don't want to talk about, or they feel uneasy talking about. And this is a platform where everybody can talk and call in and listen all about things that really, really matter. And there's now a women's radio station, and he is doing absolutely superb things and is the most lovely man, who is also an author. And I have your book here, Russ. The Gatekeeper. Now, you can buy that on Amazon and good bookshops. This one is signed to my mate George, a whiskey, a cigar, a legend, Russ. Thank you for always making me feel so welcome at the Soho Whisky Club. That was in June 2019. An incredible book. The last book that I've read that I wasn't able to put down. Buy it, read it, it's great. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, I've got another person doing a reading who I feel so very grateful. And I remember thinking a couple of months ago how lucky I am to be the manager of the Soho Whisky Club. And a major part of that is the members and the friendships that I've gained because of it. Russ, it's so lovely to be able to call you a mate. And thank you very, very much for doing this, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm blushing here. I'm blushing. In order for World Book Day, I'm channeling my inner Ernest Hemingway. It's either that or I'm auditioning for Captain Birdseye. I haven't quite made up my mind. It was at the Soho Whisky Club that I made my huge mistake, having seen the busiest man I've ever seen wearing a black fedora, looking very foreboding and forbidding, sitting on the terrace day after day. And eventually I summoned up my courage and said, "Excuse me, sir, is your name Colin Vaines?" To which he replied, "Yes, it is. And mine's a large one." And that was it. So we've been chums ever since. So thank you. And as tribute to the wonderful George Michie, in book 2 of The Gatekeeper, there is a scene where a brave sea captain saves the day. And oddly enough, his name is Captain George Michie. Who knew? Anyway, so this is the book. I wanted to choose from one of the greatest books ever written. So I thought, well, what the hell? Self-promotion. Well, it's the name of the game. And premise of this is I wanted to overturn every trope about horror books and the supernatural. And so I've never understood when you're watching a film and they say, "Meet me in the docks at midnight and come alone." And I'm sitting in the cinema going, "Are you raving mad? Meet them in Sainsbury's at Saturday at 1 p.m. You know, so I've really turned all of that. The central character is called Nick Gold. And simply for the money, he is known as the TV's paranormal detective. He doesn't believe a word of it. It's like all of those shows which are all done in green, and you never see a ghost. You never see which is about Fielding going. Ooh. So basically he does that. He's in series 4 or 5 and he's doing well. And then to his horror, he discovers it's actually all real. And he doesn't want to believe it. And he lives in Balham, so you can see how this is going to go. Anyhow, the section that I've chosen is a bit based in Soho because it's round the corner from where George works his magic for all of us. And we're very grateful to you, George. You do a wonderful job and you are just a fantastic host. So anyway, here we are. So Nick Gold, paranormal detective, is freaking out and is beginning to discover that there is a horrible happening basically every 20 years, the gates of hell open. And one poor sod has to close the gates of hell. And he's known as the Gatekeeper. And for reasons that I won't go into now, you have to read the book, it's just randomly fallen on Nick Gold to be the Gatekeeper. So here we go. Gosh, my reading. After another coffee at Bar Italia, Nick had finally managed to calm Adam Farthing down enough. Adam Farthing worked with one of his colleagues who was the director of this paranormal TV rubbish show, right? So after another coffee at Bar Italia, Nick had finally managed to calm Adam Farthing down enough so he could present on his way back to the offices of Good Foot Productions. Nick used every trick he could muster. Adam was probably very tired. He'd been working too hard. The stress of producing such great television would affect even Martin Scorsese. No, of course, he wouldn't tell anybody. No, he didn't think he was going mad. And yes, it was strictly between them. And of course, he'd be absolutely delighted to work with him again on the next series. And they were just undoubtedly friends, not just colleagues. Showbiz. Don't you love it? Christ. Gold settled the bill. He felt it was the least he could do under the circumstances and decided that something a little stronger than coffee was required. It wasn't every day that someone you didn't like had a total meltdown in front of you. Leaving the cafe with the obligatory ciao to the staff, Gold walked up Frith Street to Dean Street where the French house beckoned. It was time to think and drink. The two activities were indelibly connected. The Grade 2 listed French house was a Soho legend. Charles de Gaulle used the pub as a workplace during the Second World War. Dylan Thomas and Francis Bacon both drank there. Beer is only served in halves, and don't ever bother to ask for a pint. Gold liked its no-nonsense rules. No music, no gaming machines, no television, and no mobile phones. London's finest conversationalists would gather here, but Gold was in no mood to talk. If he faced up to the truth, he was feeling very unsettled. He walked into the small crowded bar and ordered a double Jack Daniels straight up. The barman, a grizzled veteran of more Soho history than most, gave him a look that said, "Another tough day, another drink." Gold sipped at his drink in the small space he'd found to stand in the crowded bar. Everyone in the French house expected to be jostled, sometimes by a celebrity, sometimes by a normal person. In life, thought Gold, there is weird, very weird, and the downright pass me a double bourbon. Was this some ridiculous yet very elaborate prank? It wouldn't be beyond the grounds of possibility. After all, Gold himself had seen far worse television submissions arrive across the desks at Good Foot Productions, his favourite being Stuck on You, where couples who've been through a bitter, acrimonious divorce are superglued together for a week. Colin's making notes at this point. First, considered Gold, as he ordered another double shot, there was Joanne Walsh and her insane story, an NHS nurse who ought to be entirely sensible and pragmatic, although how anyone can work so hard for so little money would counter that assumption, goes to Turkey on holiday and just happens to bump into her dead brother, as you do. Now Adam Farthing, a man with all the imagination of a coffee table, gets attacked by his grandfather, who also happens to be dead. So, what to think? What in the name of Hammer Films was going on? Gold took a deep swallow of his Jack Daniels and by a miracle caught the eye of Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky behind the bar and ordered a double straight up. First, was this a massive, well-constructed wind-up? That seemed impossible unless Adam Farthing had sneaked off to the Lee Strasberg Film and Theatre Institute in New York to take a crash course in being the new Al Pacino. There was no way he could act so convincingly. Fake crying is really hard to do, way harder than faking orgasms. Gold focused his thoughts once more. No point in ruminating whether any of his exes had faked it. No, impossible. He'd know. Then there was the nurse. There was no connection between her and Adam. They'd never met. They didn't even know each other. So in conclusion, there were only two possible explanations, the arrival of which required a packet of salted peanuts, which Gold ordered and began to eat, part of his 5 a day. Conclusion 1, this was a brilliantly conceived high production prank. There were hidden cameras capturing all of his conversations and meetings. The facial reactions, genius. Had early Saturday night ITV written all over it. Or something very, very off the Richter scale of weirdness was going on. Something so peculiar that it broke every known rule of life and death. There was only one thing to do. Order another double bourbon, and just to ring the changes, some pork scratchings. A snack so revolting in concept that only the British could have invented it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Russ. Brilliant. Well, fantastic whiskey, brilliant book. So please jump on, buy Russ's book. If you've got Prime, you can probably bloody get it by tomorrow.
I already bought it.
You already bought it. Good. It is
I want mine signed.
Well, bring it in, leave it at the club, and I'll get it. I'm sure that Russ would be happy to sign it for you.
Can I just very quickly say one more thing, please, before my wife kills me? I need to send a big kiss to Colin Vaines, to Colin Dunn, to you, George, and to Russ as well, and all my other friends that are there tonight as well. From Kimberly, I said.
Lots of love, mate. Thank you very much. Can't wait to see you from the 12th. From the 12th. I didn't reply to your email. I'm sorry. I thought I'd say it in person. In a couple of weeks, I will open the bookings for our first day. It's going to be seating only, of course, and you can get a buxom blonde waiter to come and look after you. That's going to be me. I am buxom now. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the remarkable Russ Kane with the Gatekeeper. Thank you so very much indeed. And now with the Caol 12-year-old, the fantastic Mr. Colin Dunn.
Great. I'm so pleased to hear that the club is reopening. You know, I know that George and I talked briefly about what's going to happen, and if there's an outdoor opportunity, I'd love to do the Soho Whisky Club's first outside tasting on the Old Compton Road.
Definitely.
Old Compton Street, should I say?
Definitely.
I think that would be really, really cool.
Let's do it.
Thank you so much, Russ. That's really topped things off. So I'm in that vein. I want to introduce you to my 5th choice of whiskey for the club. It's the one that's a little bit more tough, a little bit more rugged, and it's called Kahlua, which is an American liqueur full of chocolates and spices. Now this is Kahlua, and it's so weird, you know. These things remind me, whiskeys always remind me of something from the past. And with Kahlua, I always get smoky bacon crisps. And I haven't eaten smoky bacon crisps for about 15, 20 years. Do you remember those smoky bacon crisps? So Kahlua. Frezzles. Kahlua on the Isle of Islay on the west coast of Scotland in the Inner Hebrides, a place close to my heart. When I first visited there, I was in the wine trade. I met a guy called Jim McEwen at Bowmore, and within 6 weeks, I'd changed my career and I'd moved Walker's. Nice one, Rick. I'd moved from wine into whiskey around about the year 1999, end of last century. I just thought, you know what? There's so much going on with whiskey that it's not really been exploited. It's considered to be a man's drink, often an old man's drink, but there's opportunities there to move it kicking and screaming into the 20th, 21st century. And so it's, as it's turned out, so it's proved. Kahlua used to go into blends, was released for the first time as a single malt in 2002. Can you imagine? 2002. Distillery's been there for nearly 200 years. And I spoke to the distillery manager at the time, a guy called Billy Stitchell, and I said, Billy, how do you feel about Kahlua being released as a single malt? He said, it's incredible. He said, Billy had been the manager there for about 25 years. Before him, his father was the manager, and before him, his father was the manager. The Stitchell family had effectively been holding the reins at Caol for nearly 100 years. And he said every day he would go to work at Caol on the northeast coast of the island, and outside of the distillery staff, maybe a dozen of them, they would never see anybody. And all of a sudden, with the release of Caol as a single malt, people started going to Islay, and it became a destination venue. And Billy said that he was meeting people from all over the world now who were getting into whiskey. It was a beautiful moment for him. So Caol has gone from strength to strength. Can I just say, I think Moz is on this. Moz, have you noticed, Moz lives in a distillery. If you look at his Zoom pic, he lives in a distillery. Glen Moz, I think it's called. Also, a big shout out to David Norris. You seem as if you've got things pretty much organized there, David.
David's broken in.
He's broken in. And also Paul out there, the way you've designed your garden into a baseball pitch, I have to say, Field of Dreams right there, man. Field of Dreams. That is absolutely stunning. And also Joseph and LA, lovely to see you again.
Laura, you remember Laura?
Yeah, absolutely top draw to see you all again. So I'm going to get on to the book that I've chosen. It could have been two. I've got two here. I'm going to read from one, but I'm going to show you the first book that I'm not going to read from, but it's an absolute stunning book. It's called 2 by 2, Father and Son. They run a bar. They run a bar in New York. I went there a couple of years ago and I met them. It's perceived to be the oldest bar in New York, and it's called McSorley's. Right? If you ever go to New York and you want to taste and see history, just go into Google right now and look up McSorley's. Johnny Isaacs seems to know the place. Is that right, Johnny?
Yeah, it's a fantastic spot, mate. So much history there. They've got some of the World War II memorabilia there as well, from when the soldiers went off and they didn't come back. It's absolutely phenomenal. You've just got to go. Like you said, there's so much history.
Yeah, the chicken wings on the ceiling. It's just the most incredible place. You go in and order a drink, and you get two. They give you 2 half pints. You don't get a pint, you get 2 half pints. And they only sell light or dark. That's the choice, right? They tried doing spirits for 1 year, but they knocked it on the head. So when you go to McSorley's, you get a choice. It's light or dark.
Right, so
And
they don't do anything else, just 2 beers, that's it.
2 beers, and they do food.
And if you order a beer, they bring you 2 half pints. Why?
Because that's how they did it 150 years ago.
So you got one in each hand.
Yeah, there you go. You can see on the counter, on the label, 2 light and 2 dark.
Yeah, wow.
Right, and on the back, 2 light, 2 dark.
They just had a huge story, probably in the last month, in the New York Times.
Did they?
About how they've been able to survive in the light of COVID, and how it's so worth saving a bar that has been around for so long.
So what were they doing, Laura, and how have they coped?
The fact that they have been able to survive, and they've pretty much, if I'm remembering the article correctly, they tapped some donors and they tapped their own bank accounts, but they have been able to stay open or to survive in New York with COVID. Because part of the article, the point was that you have this amazing bar that has been there since the beginning of time and has such a history of New York wrapped into it as well, and not to allow it to die a horrid death because of COVID, so to speak.
Yeah. Amazing.
I'm so pleased that you know of the establishment, and I know that whenever I'm lucky enough to get over there, that's always my first port of call. It's a bit like walking into the hallowed doors of the Soho Whisky Club. There's so much history there. Is that right, George? There's
Well,
so much history.
Yeah, I'm old. You're right.
But the sheer fact that if you get a moment, I mentioned on, this is the power of the internet, I suppose. I mentioned on Facebook that I've been to I just posted a picture of the interior, right? And it was a black and white picture. You can see it on Google Images of McSorley's. And I was contacted within an hour by somebody else in the whiskey industry who said they've got the book of its history, and it was the brand ambassador of a new whiskey. I think it's called something like, not DeLorean, but McNean or something. Is that, have you heard of it? Whiskey?
There's a McNairn, but that's
it.
McNairn, yeah.
That one. So the brand ambassador sent me this book with a dram for me to enjoy.
Nice.
That was about 6 months ago. So that's what I mean about sharing. It's a wonderful place. I'm not going to read from that tonight. Maybe it's for another occasion when it's live. But I've chosen as my second choice, along with the minerally peaty Kahlua, a guy called Charles Bukowski. Now, I'm not sure if anybody of you have heard of him, Charles Bukowski. Basically, this guy, born in 1920, died in 1994. He didn't really become popular until later in life. And then it kind of like the showbiz crowd sort of embraced him with open arms. There's a lovely little mention that the lead singer of U2, Bono, is it? Bono? Paul, as I know him, Paul Hewson, he wrote to Charles Bukowski and said, look, you're one of our idols. We're playing, I think it was Madison Square Gardens. Please be our guest. You know, we'll give you the VIP seat and I will give you a shout out before we start the gig. So Bukowski took the free tickets, went along, and Paul Hewson, or Bono as he's known, introduced him. And after 5 minutes, Charles Bukowski walked out. He said he didn't like his music. But hey, that's just a throwaway story. But the point is, he's got some amazing stories, and I've got two here, so I'm not going to give you both. I think that would be unfair to you as listeners. But because one is quite moody and tough, and the other is kind of a little bit funny. So I thought it would be kind of cool to read from a Charles Bukowski book, and it's called Factotum. And for those of you, as we've definitely got a slight film buzz here this evening, if any of you see the film starring Mickey Rourke called Barfly, it's based on the life of Charles Bukowski, and it's definitely worth seeing. So I'm going to read this short one, and because it makes me smile, and it makes me laugh, and it reminds me of some evenings where the same thing has happened to me. So this was written back in 1974, but as it turned out, it only really got published just before he died. So this is from Factotum, and this is Charles Bukowski. Let me just get a quick dram. And let me just have a little Chet Baker in the background. Sundays were best because I was alone, and soon I began to take a pint of whiskey to work with me. One Sunday, after a hard night's drinking, the bottle got to me. I blacked out. I vaguely remembered some unusual activity that evening after I went home, but it was unclear. I told Jan about it the next morning before I went back to work. I think I fucked up, but maybe it's my imagination. I went in and walked up to the time clock. My time card was not in the rack. I turned and walked over to the old lady who ran the employment office. When she saw me, she looked nervous. Mrs. Farrington, my time card is missing. Henry, I always thought you were such a nice boy. Yes? You don't remember what you did, do you? She asked, looking nervously around. No, ma'am. You were drunk. You cornered Mr. Pelvington in the men's locker room and you wouldn't let him out. You held him captive there for 30 minutes. What did I do to him? You wouldn't let him out. Who is he? He's the manager of this hotel. What else did I do? You were lecturing him on how to run this hotel. Mr. Pelvington has been in the hotel business for 30 years. You suggested that prostitutes be registered on the first floor only and that they should be given regular physical examinations. There are no prostitutes in this hotel, Mr. Chinaski. Oh, I know that, Mrs. Pelvington. Farrington. Mrs. Farrington. You also told Mr. Pelvington that only 2 men were needed on the loading bay instead of 10, and that it would cut down on the theft if each employee was given 1 live lobster to take home each night in a specially constructed cage that could be carried onto buses and streetcars. You have a real sense of humor, Mrs. Farrington. The security guard couldn't get you to let go of Mr. Pelvington. You tore his coat. It was only after we called the police that you relented. I presume I've been terminated. You have presumed correctly, Mr. Chinaski. I walked off behind a stack of crates. When Mrs. Farrington wasn't looking, I cut for the employees' cafeteria. I still had my food card. I could get one last good meal. The stuff was nearly as good as what they cooked for the guests upstairs in the hotel. Plus, they gave the staff more of it. Clutching my food card, I walked into the cafeteria, picked up a tray, a knife, and a fork, a cup, and some paper napkins. I walked up to the food counter. Then I looked up. Tacked to the wall behind the counter was a piece of white cardboard covered with a large, crude scroll. Don't give any food to Henry Chinaski. That's kind of sums up the kind of life written about in this book of growing up as a man, as a young man in New York when times were hard, and Charles Bukowski would have a different job virtually every 2 weeks. He would stand in line to get employment for a day or a night. Life was so different to what it is now. And it's from another era. And Charles Bukowski and his writings continue to enthrall me, excite me, and being able to just read a short story to you all this evening gives me great pleasure. The other book I would recommend, if any of you are interested, is a book called Pulp. And the next time that I'm in the club and we're doing readings, I'd like to be able to read that out to you. So suffice to say, this evening, to be able to sit here and talk literature and films and share 5 drams with all you good people out there in your front rooms or baseball carts or your distilleries. Giggity, 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 goo. Thank you so much. Over to you, George.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Colin. This has been really special. It's such a privilege for all of us to have a brand ambassador like you who just wants to do different things. And when you first came and we did one in the Soho Whisky Club like this, it went down really, really well. And it's so lovely that we can continue doing them over Zoom. I can't wait to get you back in the club and do one live. What a brilliant tribute to World Whisky Day. What a fantastic evening I've had. I hope you guys have all enjoyed it too at home. Wow, just unbelievable. Colin Vaines, thank you so very much for accepting my appeal. Russ Kane, to you also, thank you so very much. I know that you're both incredibly busy men. And Colin, I appreciate you fitting us in first, because I know you've got many whiskey tastings over the next couple of nights based upon this concept that you've developed, Whiskey with Worlds. It's a brilliant concept. I very much enjoyed it. I thank everybody for joining. And Malcolm, thank you for being here. Guys, you can go on and buy the whiskies. Malcolm's given us some great prices tonight. Jump onto your Soho Whisky Club online platform. Buy away. Again, as I said last week, for those of you that were here, but I'll say it again, I've changed it now, $4.95. So if you buy as many bottles as you buy, $4.95 delivery. Great deal. And we've got some brilliant prices on the whiskies as well. Colin, thank you so very, very much, sir, as ever. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I look forward to coming back into the club, to seeing all your smiley faces and to swap stories, tune in, turn on and drop out drinking whiskies and chatting to all of you. So thanks for tolerating me, and to Colin and Russ and George and Hunter and Johnny and A.A. Milne and to Charles and John. We brought you back to life tonight, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Ladies and gents, all the very best. Exciting news coming up with the email that I sent you with the survey, £50, £100 or £150 tasting. I designed today a tasting that can incorporate as many as possible. We're going to do the £100 tasting. You're going to get a Little Mill. You're going to get a Rosebank. You're going to get a Bowmore 23 port cask. You are going to get a Lafroig 25.
Nice.
You're going to get a Cragganmore 25. We're going to have a big night. So I'm going to send out for that for you tomorrow. 100 quid. I'm literally taking all the money, going down to the shop, buying bottles, and we're going to have a really, really good one on that. To Colin, to Russ, thank you so very much again. To all of you for joining, thank you very much. And as he's on the call, a particular thank you to Malcolm for making the Soho Whisky Club possible. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you so much.
Colin. Always
Bye, guys.
exceptional.
Bye, everyone.
The best in the business.
Yeah.
For joining. All the best. Until next time, lots of love. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, George. Bye for now. Bye, George. Thank you again for that reading. It was gorgeous.
Cheers, Ricky. Thank you, mate.
Bye,
Thank
George.
you very much. Thank you.